As you well know, in 2011, the EPA entered into an agreement to settle a lawsuit brought by states and environmental groups in which EPA agreed to set standards for GHG emissions from new and existing fossil fuel fired power plants under Section 111 of the Clean Air Act. The Supreme Court ruled that EPA must regulate greenhouse gases if EPA finds that they endanger the health and welfare of current and future generations. Following the Supreme Court's decision, EPA issued what is known as an endangerment finding. That finding requires the EPA to take regulatory action under the Clean Air Act to curb emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, and 4 other heat-trapping air pollutants from vehicles, power plants, and other industries. That ruling allows the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as air pollutants covered by the Clean Air Act. This led to the Clean Power Plan. Essentially, the endangerment finding gave EPA its mandate to regulate fuel economy standards for vehicles, permitting requirements for new construction, or the GHG regulation of vehicles and new stationary sources. So now that you're on the job, I wanted to ask you specifically, do you believe that greenhouse gas emissions endanger the public health?
Well, as I said in my confirmation hearing, there's a progression you need to go through to kind of get to where you are. And one question is the climate changing? I think the answer is clearly yes. Second question is, do man-made emissions contribute to that? I think the answer is clearly yes. Third question is, how much do man-made emissions contribute to that? And what I said in my confirmation hearing and what I continue to believe is I'm not sure. And what I said then was, you know, for the last 10 years before coming here, I was an attorney in private practice, and nobody ever hired me to go dive into the mountain of data that exists on climate, and so there's a lot I have to learn, and that's what I said 6 months ago.
So right now you have no opinion on whether greenhouse gases endanger the public health?
Well, where I was going was, I said I have a lot to learn, and, you know, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and the Climate Protection Division is, you know, one of the divisions within my office, right. And what I asked them, you know, beginning a few months ago is to do a series of briefings on the state of the climate science to help me better understand, you know, what science is out there.
Have you taken those briefings yet?
We're in the process. I've done several, and we have more to go. There's a mountain. there's a lot out there. And
has the staff indicated that they've changed their conclusions about this at all?
Well, the endangerment, I mean, all decisions like that flow from the administrator, so that wasn't a staff decision. That was a decision by the administrator at the time.
Has the administrator expressed to you whether he has an opinion on whether greenhouse gases endanger the public health?
He has a process concern at a minimum. His concern is the endangerment finding you described was made without consideration of alternative views.
I want to get to that in a minute, but I'm asking about his particular opinion on whether greenhouse gas. What's the opinion of the administrator of whether greenhouse gases endanger the public health? Has he expressed that to you?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to speak for the administrator, but again, to complete the thought, he's very concerned about process and you know, believes in the way he talks about it, and I think is a good way to talk about it, is, you know, people with a different view haven't had a voice so far in this process, and, you know, he's been trying to find a way to allow them to have some voice. And
what's the schedule for that process? Do you know what his process is going to be?
Well, there is no process in place, and there's no schedule right now, so we've talked about it, but we're not.
Is it your intention, or do you understand it to be the intention of the administrator to revisit the endangerment finding with respect to greenhouse gases?
We don't have any plans right now. As I said, we've talked a lot about the integrity of the process that led to that determination, and so far we're focused on process and integrity, and we haven't talked about outcome.
I'm totally willing to accept your answer, except there's no process either. There's no answer on whether the administration believes that greenhouse gases pose a threat to human health or the environment. There's no answer. I'm going to get it from the administrator. I'm going to get it from you. Apparently, you haven't gotten it yet from your staff. And then everyone talks about a process, but there's no process either. There's no process for these voiceless oil and gas companies to get their voices heard. So I'm just expressing a little bit. I mean, I'm comfortable staying where we are, but I'm suspicious that that's not where you want to be.
Well, what I would say is it's important to look at the broader context. So what I mean by that is, Congressman Dingell asked me a question a second ago about car and truck standards that exist, at least from an EPA standpoint, because of greenhouse gas emissions. And, you know, my answer was we're working on a proposed rule to maybe change those standards. I didn't say we're working on a proposed rule to eliminate those standards, and, you know, we're not going to do that.
Just to conclude, there's no action right now to revisit the endangerment finding pursuant to greenhouse gases. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.